Hello and welcome to section 4 of Unit 2 of International Procurement. Today we'll be discussing economic systems and regional trade agreements. By the end of this section, you should be able to understand the overview of economic systems, economic factors affecting business environments. So as you already mentioned, we are looking at the factors or the sectors of the business environment. We already dealt with the political and then the socio-cultural system. So we move on to the economic systems. We already know that every business or all businesses, whether domestic or international, is affected by the dynamic economic environment conditions prevalent in the market. So we already know also that some of these dynamic economic conditions are demand and supply, inflation, taxes, and all that. So among many economic factors affecting businesses um, are the interest rate, demand and supply, recession, inflation, as I mentioned earlier. So the sales, production, and procurement process of a business are greatly impacted by these economic elements. So below is a list of economic factors that can affect businesses. So we'll be looking at that briefly. So for governments and economies are interrelated with each other. If government is stable, the economy is stable, as we already know that. If the governance is stable, the economy is stable because all that government does is to make sure the economy is stable for the day-to-day running of business activities. So political instability may affect the GDP growth of a country, which is called politicization of economic growth. So when some instability occurs that sort of affects the GDP growth of a country is what we term politicization of economic growth. So economic growth is not affected by the nature of the government, being it democracy or dictatorship, but is affected by the policies, either fiscal or monetary policies. So we should take notes and we should consider that economic growth is not affected by dictatorship or democracy, but then it's affected by the policies the government adopts. So we come to some of the factors we mentioned earlier that we'll be looking at. So demand and supply is an economic factor you may want to um, consider. So demand is how willing and able a consumer is to purchasing what a business offers or supply yes, what a business offers, and supply is how able a business is to make available what a consumer needs. So as demand is to what the the purchaser wants, supply is the availability of that good the purchaser wants. I mean, making that available, and that is a factor that affects business environment. Again, we look at money and banking. So, banking facilitates monetary and fiscal policies that affect businesses and the economic environment, also the consumer of business. Again, money in circulation dictates the demand of the consumers. The economic environment, activities, and inflations are influenced by the monetary policies of a particular country. So, the money in circulation or the money in circulation, I mean, or the monies at the banks, as we may want to put it, or the monies in circulation are also some economic factors that affect the business environment. So we look at money and banking. So the fiscal policies or the monetary policies of of the government also affect the economic growth of of the country, and hence it affects business activities or the business environment. And look at the economic growth and development. So among all the economic factors that are affecting businesses, development is the utmost important one. So basically, if the economy is affected, we are just looking at how the economy may not be developed. So our main focus is on economic development. So as a business needs to cater for the demands of an economic environment potent society. That's for example, the luxury brand performs Haiti during an economic upswing. So much more than the organizations which their outcomes is essential offering. So basically, we are not just looking at the luxury in living, but then the economic growth and development of um, businesses or of the government, and hence moving on to business, um, yeah, the business environment. Again, look at the income and employability. The density of employment determines the rate of demand in company. So as we already mentioned, that the supplier is making available the good, and then demand is how much or how willing organizations or how willing individuals may want to consume or purchase. So if the income of individuals and then the employment of the citizens are at the highest level, there's that need of them consuming, or there's that need of them demanding for products, goods, works, and services. And hence that may affect business environment. Again, we look at the general price, the general price levels. So generally, price levels of commodities are also a key economic factor that affect businesses and play a huge part in its growth. So pricing of goods. So if the products are are very expensive, you may not get people, or you may only get few people buying, and they may even buy it as some form of good of ostentation. So if they only buy as good of ostentation, then it means your production line should be producing very little or very small to meet these customer demands. But if it is if your production schedule is on the high, or you produce generally, and then your pricing levels are high, you could talk about, the cost of raw materials that would you may incur, and all of these factors are economic factors that affect the business environment. Again, we look at trade cycles. So, trade cycles also play an integral part in the fluctuation of cost of goods and services sold by a business. So, the cycle may include, but are not limited to, the depression, recession, recovery, and prosperity. Just as at some point you may be recessing, at some point you may recover, and at some point you may be at the prosperity level. So trade in itself have cycles that, or have phases that goes through. So every phase determines its strategic movement against it. So if it's depression, if it's recession, you have to find a better way of maintaining the balance in the economy. So the trade cycles are also some factors that affect business environments economically. Again, we look at inflation. So usually it occurs when the supply of money is too much in the economy, or the economic environment, while this is also not equally supported by a similar available by a similar availability um, of goods and services. So we are saying that when we have a lot of money in the system, but then it is not equally supported by the availability of goods. It's like I'm carrying 1,000 cedis, and all that I could get was bread. Then it means inflation is high. All of these things is also Inflation is also an economic factor that affects business environment. So if there's too much money in the system, but then it is not matching against a specific value, or a similar vein, um, in a similar vein, it is not matching against an availability of a good or service, then we are seeing there is inflation. So in this section, we looked at understanding the overview of economic systems, the economic factors affecting the business environment. Thank you.